So, all right, so we'll go ahead and we'll get going here. Thanks to everybody for coming in. My name is Kevin Kopchinski. I run the planetarium and give star shows when that's open. And I teach other aspects of what's called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math here at the museum. The planetarium's still under renovation. We're getting there, making progress on that. But meanwhile, we're glad to join you in these virtual sessions and continue a little bit of astronomy. So again, it's really exciting, of course, when we have historical events to watch and to talk about. So not so much of that this year coming up, as maybe if you were here in January, we discussed that a little bit, but we're still, the sky continues to change. Our Earth is orbiting, and that gives us changes in the sky that happen gradually and keep accumulating, and we are marching on towards spring, no matter what it felt like this week. And as a matter of fact, we do have a sort of a milestone that we just passed. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to share out the screen here, and I do apologize. I did forget to mention that I'm here with Rich Sanderson, who's president of the Springfield STARS Club. So we got a nice view. Hopefully everybody's seeing a nice view of the night sky right now. If you're not seeing that, go ahead and say something in chat. And as soon as I find the chat again, we'll see what you have to say. And so, yeah, we do this program, Stars Over Springfield, in partnership and coordination with the Stars Club of Springfield. It's a club that's been here for quite a while. And Rich is the current president, and he's here to let us know a little bit about the club. So Rich, go ahead, and then when you want your picture, just let me know.
Yeah, you can put the first slide on. Thank you. And again, my name is Richard Sanderson. I'm the president of the Stars Club, and I've been in the club for a good portion of my life. I joined when I was 18 years old, way back in 1973. So I've been a member since then. And it's one of a number of science-related clubs that exist, that meet at the museum in different places. And it's got a pretty interesting and colorful history. I thought because I didn't have any astro photos to show tonight, I'd share a few historic images just to show you that astronomy education and amateur astronomy has been alive and well in Western Massachusetts for almost going back at least a century. And the Stars Club formed in 1934. A gentleman who I met near the end of his lifetime, Carl Alsing, formed the club in 1934, and he was a refrigeration technician at Westinghouse in Springfield, and got interested in making telescopes and looking at the night sky. And a few co-workers shared his interests, so they began getting together, working on telescopes, going to observing programs, and little by little, word spread, and people outside of Westinghouse wanted to get involved, and they formed the Springfield STARS Club. And STARS was an acronym for Springfield Telescope and Reflector Society. Reflector is a type of telescope, so they were able to get words to spell out the word stars way back then, and that's been our name ever since 1934. And it began as a telescope making club up until World War II, and then it kind of changed to a general astronomy club for anybody that was interested in the night sky. You didn't have to be a telescope maker. But back on the years prior to World War II, telescope making, amateur telescope making was an interesting hobby that grew out of the Depression because it was something you could do without spending a lot of money, and then build a telescope, you know, if you knew the right techniques, and then use it to look at the night sky, which is free to everybody. So it kind of got popular during the Great Depression and has retained its popularity ever since then. This picture shows the Stars Club when it was 3 years old, with some guests out in Wilbraham, which is where the founder Carl Alsing lived. And Carl is on the right of the picture. He's the second person in from the right in the foreground. There's a man right behind him, but he's the shorter guy in the foreground. That's Carl Alsing. Right. Yep. And he was the gentleman that I met just by going through phone books and finding his name. I had heard about him and didn't know where he lived. And I went through a bunch of phone books at the Springfield Library till I found a Carl Alsing, and I called him up and I said, "Are you the Carl Alsing that founded the Stars Club?" And there was a long pause. And then he said, "You mean that club's still around?" And it turned out it was the founder of the Stars Club. So we pulled him back into the fold. And a lot of people got scattered around during World War II. But they were a pretty active club back then, holding observing sessions, photographing eclipses, sending articles and notes of their observations into Sky and Telescope. And as I'll mention when I show one of the coming pictures, they were also involved in creating a giant telescope that we still use at the Science Museum. So let's jump to the next slide. And this, I believe, is, the Foucault pendulum is a very popular exhibit at the museum. It's a classic proof of the Earth's rotation. And the Stars Club and the Science Museum early on have become partners in not only looking at the night sky, but popularizing astronomy, educating people. Ever since the 50s, we've done joint programs together, observing eclipses and comets and different things. And it's been a very valuable symbiotic partnership between the Stars Club and the Science Museum. And it's something that we're very pleased with, and we're very good friends with each other. And this is one of the first big projects that the Stars Club did for the museum for the 100th anniversary of the museum, which was founded back in 1859, excuse me. And then in 1959, it was the 100th anniversary of the Science Museum. And so the Stars Club decided to build a Foucault pendulum as a gift for the Science Museum for its 100th anniversary. So some members back then, Jack Welch, Dr. Richard Scott, and Warren Fillmore, and some others got together and built a Foucault pendulum. And the pendulum, once you get it moving, it swings back and forth, and the Earth rotates beneath it. So it's almost like the hands of a clock. If it's swinging in one direction, you look at it an hour later, its direction of swing has changed slightly. And that's because the Earth is rotating. It proves that the Earth rotates once approximately every 24 hours. And when that pendulum first went online, as you can see on the left, it was a cover photo, and there was an article in Sky and Telescope magazine, which is one of the premier astronomy magazines that still exists today. And it gave a nice article about the new pendulum for the Springfield Science Museum built by the Stars Club. Okay, next one. Now, back in the 1930s, they were building the 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar Observatory. And I know when I was in high school and college and getting involved in astronomy, I mean, everybody knew about the great 200-inch. It was the biggest telescope in the world. It was an iconic instrument that had been used for research for decades. And back in the 1930s, it was still being built. And at Corning Glassworks in New York, they made the disc of glass that would be ground into a very precise concave mirror, 200 inches across. The 200-inch is the diameter of the mirror. So they created a mold, and they melted these huge ladles filled with molten Pyrex glass that wouldn't expand or contract inside the telescope. And they poured this molten glass into this mold. And of course, they made a little bit extra so they wouldn't run short. And after they poured the glass for the 200-inch mirror that would be ground and polished for the Mount Palomar scope, they had enough glass left over to make a half a dozen 20-inch discs of glass, which they did, so as not to waste that molten Pyrex. And so they made these 20-inch discs. And back in the 30s, the 6 Stars Club members chipped in $20 each to buy one of those from Corning. It was $120. And they got the last one that was available from Corning. So they got this disc of glass 20 inches across. That was the same glass that's in the 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar. And they started grinding it into a telescope mirror. A reflecting telescope has a concave mirror that's accurate to a few millionths of an inch. So it's a very precise procedure to create that mirror, which is then coated with reflective aluminum. And so back in the 1930s, one of the members knew somebody that worked at Gifford Lock Shop on Lyman Street, which is still there, and they got permission to use a room in the basement as an optical shop. And so the early Stars Club members were down there grinding and polishing this 20-inch mirror, which is a long and tedious process. But like so many things, the Stars Club was disrupted by World War II. Life changed when World War II started. Gasoline rationing, members couldn't make it to meetings because of that. Some members went to war. One of our members actually died in a Bataan death march during World War II. And so the club kind of dissolved for a while. But then after the war was over, a few years later, it reformed. And they still had this 20-inch mirror that the museum was holding on to, the Science Museum, for safekeeping. And eventually, a new generation of Stars Club members said, hey, we should finish that telescope and install it at the Science Museum for public education. And so that's exactly what happened. And the chief person of the project is the person in the upper left is Warren Fillmore, who worked at Mass Mutual. He lived out in Wilbraham, and he was an award-winning telescope maker who had written a book about making telescopes, and he won prizes for his instruments that he made at home. And so he, with help from other club members, he designed and built the telescope that's at the museum now. And in the upper right-hand picture are 3 of the people that were the main ones involved in this project. On the left is Dr. Frank Korkus, who built the planetarium at the museum, and he was the director of the museum at the time. Second from the left is Dr. Richard Scott, who lived to be 95 years old. He died a couple of years ago. He was a surgeon who was also an advanced telescope maker, and he was in charge of doing all the mathematics for calculating all the curves on all the different lenses and the mirror and everything that had to be exactly shaped to precise measurements in order to get a nice clear image. And of course, on the right, the red shirt is Warren again, Warren Fillmore. And there's the disc being held in that wooden stand there. And the bottom 2 pictures shows the completed telescope and the observatory on the museum roof. And that's the telescope that the Stars Club and the Science Museum staff use for our Stars Over Springfield programs when they're held at the museum. So once the COVID-19 is a thing of the past and we're meeting at the museum, you'll get to see the telescope that's in the picture at the bottom there, and go up onto that rooftop observatory and look at the sky, and also a nice bird's eye view of Springfield. Next one.
Okay, Rich, we have a question in the Q&A. The question was, what is the tallest telescope size? And I suspect that we really should be thinking about the diameter of the telescope.
Yeah,
that's the real key. The wider the telescope is, the wider this mirror is, the more light that you can collect. And I know, as you said, 200 inches across was pretty big in its day, but that has been exceeded by now, correct?
Yes, there's a number of telescopes And I'm just looking it up to make sure, because I know there's new ones that are being built.
Yeah, Kevin and Richard, while you're looking it up, I did look up on Google real quickly, and it's in
Okay.
the answer in the question and answer. The Gran Telescopio Canarias in La Palma and the Canary Islands is currently the world's largest single aperture telescope.
Yeah, 10.4 meters. So somebody can calculate that into inches, but it's a lot bigger. And that's a single mirror. But nowadays they're also making telescopes where they have more than one mirror. It's like multiple telescopes where the light is gathered into one image, which they use computers and all kinds of fancy optics to do that. And so they can make a telescope that's essentially bigger, but it's not a single mirror. It's a bunch of them, because when you make a big hunk of glass like that, it gets pretty heavy. And after a while, it's so heavy that it'll sag and change its shape. So when you get a big enough lens or mirror, there's a lot of problems involved to do with gravity distorting the shape and everything, because the glass just weighs so much. But yes, that 10.4 meter is the biggest. And I know there's projects underway now for other big telescopes in the world today. But for decades, it was the 200 inch. And the 200 inch at Mount Palomar is still an active telescope that's like the Hubble Space Telescope, still doing a lot of good science. One thing that the Stars Club does, collaborates with the museum on every month, is the Stars Over Springfield, which is what we're doing right now. But these pictures show what it looks like to have a live Stars Over Springfield, where we have 50 or 60 people in the Tolman Auditorium, and somebody gives a presentation about some aspect of astronomy. There's Jack Magus in the upper left, a longtime good friend of mine, experienced astronomy educator. And we do a program and then go up to the planetarium and see the stars for a while, and then go up to the observatory. And if it's clear, like in the upper right picture with my son Richie, and the telescope's aimed at the moon. The moon is a great thing to look at through a telescope like that. Of course, from the city, there's a lot of light pollution and smog, and it kind of interferes with dim objects. But we look at the bright planets and the moon and things like that through this 20-inch telescope. Next one. Now, I mentioned we go down to the planetarium, and this is the Seymour Planetarium, which isn't going to look anything like this pretty soon, because it's undergoing a historic renovation. But we're very proud of the fact that here in Springfield, we have the oldest operating projection planetarium in the country. It was built during the Great Depression by the gentleman in the picture on the left, Dr. Frank Korkus, who was my boss back in 1970, when I went to the museum when I was 15 years old and asked him if I could work in the planetarium. And he said, yeah, we can find something for you to do. And pretty soon I was doing public planetarium shows and eventually running the observatory. So he was a big positive influence in my life and many other people's lives, because hundreds of thousands of people went to that planetarium over the years to learn about astronomy, and young people were inspired to become scientists and astronomers and engineers. And so planetariums played a major role in astronomy education during the 20th century. It went online in 1937, as I said, and it's still functioning. It's now the oldest operating planetarium in the country and the oldest American planetarium in the whole world, right here in Springfield, Mass. Frank and his brother John Korkus built it, and they built another one for the city of Boston that no longer exists. So this is the only Korkus planetarium in the world, and once it's renovated, it's going to look better than ever, and it's nice that we're going to continue to celebrate the history of this marvelous educational tool. And over the years, it's attracted some interesting people who wanted to see the night sky, a simulated version projected onto the dome, which is what that ball does. It projects the stars onto a dome ceiling. And early on in its history, somebody you might have heard of, Clark Gable, the famous actor from Gone with the Wind, visited the planetarium, was promoting the movie, wanted to see this marvelous instrument that he was reading about in magazines, and made a stop at the Science Museum to see it. Astronaut Story Musgrave, who helped repair the Hubble telescope. I got to stand in there with him for an hour and show him the stars. And he talked about what the sky looked like from Earth orbit, from the space shuttle. And in the picture on the right is astronaut Katie Coleman, who's been on several space shuttle missions, and she came to the planetarium as well to enjoy the night sky, a simulated view of the night sky inside our own Seymour Planetarium. So a visit to the planetarium is a part of our Stars Over Springfield program that we do when we go back to doing the live ones again. And I think there's one more after that, and this will be the last picture of Astronomy Day. Yeah, there we go. One thing that the Stars Club really enjoys collaborating with the museum on is an annual event called Astronomy Day in the spring, which is a day that's been designated all over the country where clubs and museums and schools and professional and amateur astronomers promote astronomy to the public. And we have a big event at the museum. As you can see, we set up a bunch of telescopes outdoors to look at sunspots, and we have face painting and tours of the observatory, planetarium shows, and people indoors. My buddy Jack Magus brings his meteorite collection, and it's really a good time. So again, you know, that's something that doesn't happen during the pandemic, but will resume possibly next year when hopefully things are back to normal. That'll happen in the springtime, and stop down and take a look at our nearest star, the sun, with safely filtered telescopes to see the eruptions and the sunspots on the surface of our sun. So that's just a little idea of what the Stars Club is all about. You don't have to be a professional or even an experienced astronomer. Anybody with an interest in astronomy is welcome to join of any level. We've waived our membership dues because we're not having live meetings anymore until the pandemic's over. So there's no membership dues. And if you want to have your name put on our list, you can contact me, and my email address is rhs31416@yahoo.com. rhs31416@yahoo.com. And just send me your name and I'll put you on our list, and you'll get notices of our meetings. Our next one will be February 23rd at 7 o'clock, Tuesday evening. Steve Hubbard from Rhode Island is going to talk to us over Zoom about his trip to Chile in 2019 to see a rare and spectacular total eclipse of the sun. So that'll be on the evening of February 23rd. Steve Hubbard from the Rhode Island Astronomy Club is going to share a program with folks in the Stars Club, and you're welcome to join in. Just send me your email address, rhs31416@yahoo, and we'll put you on the list. All right, thank you, Kevin.
We've got the email. We've got Rich's email address in the chat. So scroll up and you'll be able to find that. We did last spring, last May, we did a virtual astronomy day where we posted a lot of features online. I made a few videos for that, and we'll do something this year virtually for Astronomy Day. That's going to be in early May. I forget the exact date. And then depending on how things go, maybe we'll have a little bit of something happening at the museum, especially if it's a nice day and we can do things outside like we're seeing on some of these pictures. So definitely, look forward to for that. One way, definitely virtually, we'll have some features, and if we're lucky, we'll be able to do something, a little something at the museum. It won't be quite the same. We can't have that many things going, and you saw how crowded it was on some of those things. We'll have.
Looks like it's on Saturday, May 15th.
It's the 5th. Okay.
Saturday,
okay.
May 15th.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, because the first quarter moon is about that time of month, it seems, this year. You got the Stars Club meeting, as Rich mentioned, and then also there was a question about meetings. Also, this Stars Over Springfield, we'll be doing this every first Friday from now until May. So we'll have those to look forward to. So as I mentioned a little bit into the as we had people coming in, we have passed a bit of a milestone this past week in the progress of the seasons, in the progress of our Earth going around the sun. And we noted that actually on the 2nd, which you probably know as Groundhog's Day. And we know kind of what the deal is with Groundhog's Day, right? It's something about, you know, how much winter is left. And you have this groundhog and he comes out, and if he doesn't see his shadow, he stays out, and it'll be 6 weeks until spring. But if he sees his shadow, he runs back in, and it'll be 6 weeks until spring. Or in other words, the groundhog isn't really all that good at predicting things. But why, why that date? And it turns out that that is a sort of an astronomical date as well. You may be familiar with the idea of solstices and equinoxes. I'm getting up a picture for you. There we go. So hopefully you're looking at a diagram of the Earth in different positions. We're familiar, I think, a little bit more maybe with the solstices and the equinoxes. And this is where the Earth gets to certain positions in its orbit, and we see a certain effect. So for example, at the December solstice, our winter solstice, the sun rises at it and reaches, and at noon it's at its lowest point in the year. Its position at noon is the lowest, and in the June solstice it's at the highest point. In March and September, the sun is directly over the equator at noon. It would shine straight down into a deep well on that date on the equator. And we nowadays typically mark our beginnings of seasons with these dates. But the 2nd was the approximate date of what's called a cross-quarter day. This is a day halfway between the solstice and the equinox, when the sun is halfway from its solstice position to its equinox position. And that is approximately February 2nd every year. So this is a time when winter is half over. And there's a lot of folklore about that. Another observance on the 2nd is the church observance of Candlemas. And so you have sayings such as, half your wood and half your hay you should have on Candlemas Day. So this is a good point to look and say, hey, it's half over, you should still have half your winter supply still left. Other cultures in the past and some traditional ones today actually mark the first day of the seasons with the cross-quarter days. The most famous of those calendars is probably the Celtic calendar. And in their calendar, the February 2nd would have been the first day of spring. So, the equinox would be the middle of their spring. And there's it makes maybe some sense in a way. By February, the sun is getting higher, and not so much this week, but the weather might be getting somewhat warmer. And, and maybe people are beginning to feel that spring is coming on. And, we know these things now, but even in the past, people really understood these things. So for example, I brought up some names of constellations there. And if we're looking, so for example, if we're looking, say, in December, on the day of the solstice, if we're looking in towards the sun, it's daytime, and we can't see the stars, but there's still stars out in that direction. We just can't see them. And there's the name of some of the constellations that would you might have been able to see during the day if the sun didn't make the sky turn blue and wash everything out. And in ancient times, people would be aware that the sun would be positioned against some of these constellations, so to speak. And they knew of, this is a somewhat different diagram here from more from the point of view of the Earth. And as we look out from the Earth, we see the sun in different positions. And so in winter, it's against the sun would, if you could see the stars in the day, the sun would be among the stars of Sagittarius. And so coming in the spring, they'll be among the stars of Pisces. And then technically, I need to come in and fix this because technically it's really Taurus for summer. It just is inside of Taurus now and not in Gemini anymore. So, and so you might say, okay, great. How did you do that? So I've got here a simulation of a sunrise. And at this, or just a little bit before sunrise, and we're looking toward the northeast and just coming into the sky, just ahead of the sun, we see the glow of light. The sun is coming up and it's still soon going to wash everything out. Just ahead of that, we see the Pleiades coming up. And so if you were standing there watching that, you'd see the Pleiades, but then the sun's coming up. And so just a few minutes, the sunlight would wash everything out and the Pleiades would disappear. You'd only see them for, maybe a couple of minutes or so. And this is called a heliacal rising. And as you're going to see in a few minutes, when we look at the night sky, Taurus is, well, Pleiades are part of Taurus, and the other part of Taurus, the main part of Taurus is underneath of this and below this, so to speak, and the sun is below the horizon. So you can see that you can kind of tell that the sun is somewhere near the constellation of Taurus at the time that this, again, the simulation of this. So this is something that people could observe or could have observed. You can observe it now, and people were observing this very, very much in ancient civilizations. Heliacal risings were very important to people to track the seasons. And, so they were very well aware of these positionings and the motions of the sun, and they would know, when things were, how things were progressing. And they needed to use the stars because most of the calendars way back then were lunar calendars, and the lunar calendars just didn't align with the seasons at all. So there's, again, we did pass that important milestone. We are on the way to spring, no matter what, again, no matter what it feels like. See, and again, this is actually a good point because this week sure feels like anything but spring in some ways, but you can't tell by the weather. The weather is very capricious. You can always have unusual, unusual weather for any particular season. And so, you'd almost think from this week, we're in the middle of winter and spring is far from being getting closer. So by looking at these, looking at the progress of the constellations, you can tell. So here we are, we're looking at toward the west. This is early in the month. I think this is actually tonight's sky. And it's about 6:30 in the evening. It's plenty of time for the sun to have gone down and the sky to get dark. And as we look towards the west, and we see 1, 2, 3, 4 stars. These are the stars of Pegasus, the winged horse. So you can see it's kind of low there in the sky. There's a little bit of dusk below that. It may not be it may not be brilliantly bright, as bright as it might have been earlier in the year, but it's still there, but low in the west. And this is going to be about the last month that we get to see Pegasus before it gets too low, and we'll have to wait until next fall to see it again. If we move out to the south, we're going to see directly, almost, I have to pull just a little bit, directly above south, there's the Pleiades. So they are about due south now at the onset of darkness, at the beginning of the evening, and down to their lower right there, there's Mars. So Mars is the one planet that you can see in the evening this year. And then there's the rest of Taurus below, so to speak, below Pleiades. And remember that they move from the east, so this would have been directly underneath over in the eastern sky. And then, of course, we have Orion, and we're looking toward the southeast. So Orion is moving out of the eastern sky, moving into the southeastern sky. And if you go out to look at a similar time, looking at the stars at a similar time each time you go out, say, for example, about an hour to an hour and a half after sunset, you'll notice this progression throughout the weeks and the seasons. And now in the evening sky below Orion, this bright object here, this is Sirius, the Dog Star. This is the brightest star in the night sky, and it's the main star of Canis Major, Orion's hunting dog. So we have Orion up here, and he kind of looks like the outline of a person. We've got two shoulders above, we've got two knees. Sometimes this is shown as an upraised foot, so two knees or feet below, and there's his belt that he's wearing on his waist. It has a reasonable resemblance to a torso of a person, and many cultures around the world have seen this as a person. So if this is a hunter, he's going to maybe have a dog. Where do you put the dog? Okay, you don't put the dog halfway across the sky somewhere. Right? The dog is going to be right behind Orion. And as the sky progresses and Orion moves night by night, again, looking at a similar time in the evening, night by night, you'll see him further and further to the south. The dog follows faithfully behind, just like a good dog. Okay. There's just one slight problem. It doesn't really look much like a dog over there. Okay. And the thing to remember is that the people were not really trying to make realistic looking pictures when they were doing this. This was a way to remember and understand the sky and to make sure that you properly identify the stars, because if you're going to use the stars to help you track the seasons and plant your crops at the right time, you darn well better know the stars one from another. So this whole thing helped them to do that. And again, the stories that went with it maybe help them to remember things as well. It's not because it looks like something. And I do kind of emphasize that a lot, because I've noticed over the years, I get a lot of comments from people, oh gosh, that doesn't look like a dog or whatever. No, it doesn't. And it really wasn't supposed to. So if you're looking up at a particular constellation and you're saying, oh, I don't get it, it doesn't look like that, don't worry, it's not you. It probably doesn't look like that. So, and then one last thing here in the east, as I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So actually we're in the southeast still. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see that. We also, all of these constellations make up a pattern that's called the winter hexagon. So if we have Orion's foot here, this is Rigel. Then down below, there's Sirius the Dog Star. This is Canis Major, the big dog. Then we move up here. There's a bright star all kind of by itself. And gosh, we should probably give that a name, maybe give that a constellation of some kind. What could it be? Well, I don't know, it's kind of next to the big dog. It's kind of behind Orion. Hey, let's call that the little dog. Right? So there it is. There's the little dog. And if you think that's a lousy looking dog, that's just two stars. But anyway, there's that one. Then we have the two stars of Gemini up above, the constellation Auriga, the bright star Capella, and back around. And then we have Aldebaran in Taurus. So we have this large, lopsided, I think some people actually call this the winter circle, I believe. Isn't that right, Rich? It's a very lopsided hexagon, but it's a pattern that you can see there. And again, this pattern will gradually move more to the south and then to the west as as the season progresses. Well, for season progressing, let's look out here in the northeast, and I need to zoom in just a little bit so he shows up better. And down very low in the northeast, we have this thing looking like a backwards question mark. Here is Leo the lion. This is the front end of Leo. That's all we see right now. The round part is going to be the head. This one actually, come back later. Okay, come back for Stars Over Springfield, maybe next month or the month after. This will be up more prominently, and this one actually has a reasonable resemblance to a lion when you can see the whole thing, but this is the head. There's the chest, the bright star on his chest. When Leo shows up, just as it's getting dark, and you can see Leo just above the horizon, there's your halfway point of winter. And winter's halfway over. Doesn't matter what the weather is telling us. Swinging around to the north, the Big Dipper is getting up higher and higher in the northern sky. And finally, that last star of the handle is now cleared the horizon, and maybe not that pretend building in the picture here, but it's cleared the horizon and now is visible. We've gone through the late part of fall and the early part of winter with the Big Dipper down low to the horizon at the onset of evening and not easily seen. So now there it is much higher. If we follow the pointers, if we follow the pointers, we get to the North Star, the Little Dipper, which is very much of a dimmer constellation. And then up above them, this now M shape of Cassiopeia. And this is supposed to be her throne. There's her seat. There's the back of her chair. And so she is hanging upside down right now in this throne. As the seasons progress in the northern sky, what happens is they don't kind of come and go, they just move around in this large circle. So she'll be right side up pretty soon. So that's how the month starts out. Let's go ahead and take a quick peek at how we end up. So we'll come back to the we'll come back to the western sky here and bring up the dates, and let's go. Let's just go to March and then come backwards. Okay, there we go, end of the month. And you see that Pegasus got a lot lower. There's the glow of sunset. So 6:30 by the end of the month might be starting to get to be a little early. By the end of the month, we'll see the slightest hint of daylight lingering at 6 o'clock. And into 6:30. This is more like 6:30. So again, showing sort of a progress of the seasons. By the end of the month, now Orion is to the south, and the Pleiades have moved more to the southwest. And look at this, by the end of the month, look at Mars right under the Pleiades. So remember, at the beginning of the month, it was down lower to the to the west, and as the evenings go by, Mars is a planet, it's moving, it's in orbit, we're in orbit, we see it from a different perspective all the time, and that perspective makes it look like it's moving among the stars, and you can watch that motion. Mars is close to us, so the apparent motion is pretty fast. And then by the end of the month, we'll be able to get a somewhat better look at Leo showing up there, and the Big Dipper has really cleared the horizon pretty well by the end of the month. So that's what you have to look forward to for the stars. For the moon, we just had the third quarter moon yesterday. The third quarter moon rises approximately at midnight, which means that tomorrow morning you could see the moon in the morning sky, and up until it'll set somewhere around noontime. So the moon actually can be seen during the day during a large part of the month. The first quarter moon is going to be on the 19th, and we have a full moon on the 27th. Now, if we look toward, let's get back to, we'll get back to the Pleiades here and Mars, and let's take a look at the 18th of February. I'm just going to back up real fast. There we go. And hey, we've got the moon. And on the 18th, it'll be an almost first quarter moon. It's going to be just below Mars. And also notice that I went back from the end of the month to the 18th. And on the 18th, Mars is not really under the Pleiades yet. And you see that getting closer and closer and closer each night or each clear time that you're able to go out and watch the stars. And then as the days go on, the next night, the moon will look like it moves over some. It's going to be near the stars of Taurus right down there. It moves over again the following night and the following night, and it's going to get pretty close to Gemini. And then again, towards the end of the, oops, sorry, we're going to have to just shift over. Toward the end of the month, it ends up, there's Leo. Toward the end of the month, it's going to be staring Leo right in the face. Right, so a couple of things maybe you can look forward to that. As far as the planets go, well, as you saw, we're only seeing Mars in the evening. In order to see other planets, you're going to have to get up before the sun does. It's not too awfully hard to do that at this time. And let's go.
Kevin, I'm going to break in right here.
Okay.
We have some good questions in our question box.
All right, let me find that.
Someone would like to know where in the sky, what direction is Gemini?
Gemini is going to be at the beginning of the month more towards the southeast. And let's see, where is it? There it is there. We have the 25th up. By the 25th, it's, well, it's still more towards the east, I guess. So it's going to be higher in the end of the month than it is now. So look at this point, look lower to the eastern or maybe southeastern sky and look for these two stars that are right near each other.
Good. And then another question is, can we still see Jupiter?
I'm going to get to Jupiter. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can see Jupiter. And I'm getting to that.
Okay. So before you move, Kevin, before you move on,
yes.
we had another great question, which was, why can't we feel the Earth move during all of this? Yeah.
Mainly because it's just so big. And it's pretty amazing because on average, this orbital speed of our Earth is about 18 miles a second, 18 miles a second on average. But I think, one, the Earth is so big. I think the other thing too is that the stars are so far away that you have to wait a couple of days before you notice that motion. So you're not really feeling it that way either. So we don't have a really good perspective to feel ourselves moving. It's not like we're out in the car and we're driving along and we see the trees whizzing by or something like that.
You know, one thing is that the air that we're breathing in the atmosphere is moving along with us. So you don't really notice that. If it's not like a hurricane where the wind is hitting you, the wind is moving with us. So there's no relative.
The whole thing
is kind of a counterproductive thing. And a lot of people in ancient times had a hard time believing that the Earth moved. That's why they thought the universe rotated around us, revolved around us.
All right, and I see somebody's asking about Mars missions, and yes, well, I think there's several missions from countries. I know for NASA, we're landing a rover. I believe it's on the 18th, and you're gonna, and I think there's going to be some coverage of that from NASA and probably other places as well.
Yeah, I know the latest issue of the Starry Scoop has an article about that.
Yeah, that's right. I want to get to mention that. I've got some pictures from her coming up, so we'll definitely get to that. I think we got all the Q&A. Is that right, Mike?
Yes, except when is the next Stars Club meeting?
The next meeting is February 23rd. They're on the fourth Tuesday of the month through May. Fourth Tuesday of every month at 7 o'clock. So February 23rd.
Great, thank you.
That's a Tuesday. And if people send me their email address, you'll get a reminder a few days ahead with the link for the Zoom meeting.
Okay, and while Rich was mentioning that, we've moved to the 25th of February. Oh, and there was a question somebody asked, are we talking about February or March? And we are talking about February. If I slipped up at some point and said March, I do apologize for that, but we are talking about February. So here we are on the 25th, 5:45 in the morning, and just ahead of the light of the sun, you might be able to spot Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. They were in the evening sky, but as we've orbited, as they've orbited, they've moved to a position where they were more or less lined up with the sun or in the same direction as the sun, so we couldn't see them. But now they're still moving and we're still moving, and now they're in a direction that we can now see them in the or getting to be able to see them in the morning sky. Honestly, this is going to be, not that easy because the sun, the brightness of the sun may wash them out to some extent, but then getting into March, it's going to get easier and easier, except that you're going to need to get up earlier and earlier to do it. That's where you can see the other planets coming up. So also last month we did get a question and a request about the space station. There is a site. There's a couple sites. This one is spotthestation.nasa.gov, and you can go there, put in your location. And I'm going to back up. You put in your location and then you get a map that looks like this near and around you with all these little dots showing you places from which you might be able to see the space station. So I'm going to click in on Springfield. And when you look at a listing like this, the one thing that you really want to key in on is the maximum height. It's listed in degrees of arc. So 0 degrees is going to be looking at the horizon, 90 degrees is going to be looking straight overhead. So we can see back on the 2nd, it was visible like halfway up in the sky. So you want to look for a height that's fairly large. That's great. Halfway up is really great. Yesterday, 70 degrees, very high up in the sky. And it looks like there's going to be one tomorrow. Not quite as high, 24 degrees, starting at 6:25. And it appears in the west. It'll move across toward the south, and it will disappear toward the south. If it's clear, you'll be able to see the space station. There's also Heavens Above, which is another spot, another site that you can go to see the space station. And the one thing about Heavens Above, when you get there, you have to watch out, because see up here, they locate you, see that 0 degrees north, 0 degrees east, okay, which is off the coast of Africa. So this is the listings for being off the coast of Africa. You're going to have to go, actually, you'll probably not get this site. So you have to go to the home page and set up your, there we go, change your observing location, and see, there we are off the coast of Africa, and move yourself over to North America and zoom in and click wherever it is you are. And then now once you get that set, you go down, you update, and then here it is, ISS. And they don't predict too far ahead. Let's see, they're predicting up until the 9th actually, and their highest point, well, looks like on the 7th, they've got one on the 7th. Now 1700, that's actually 537. So the sky's going to be kind of on the bright side, but the space station is pretty bright. So maybe what is that going to be, Sunday? So maybe Sunday, that's going to be a higher site. So that can be something to look forward to. So that's heavensabove.com,
Kevin,
and spotthestation.nasa.gov.
Kevin,
Yes.
before you close those windows, do you mind dropping those links into
Yeah,
the
let me,
box?
yes,
Thank you.
And
yes.
there is a button on Heavens Above where you can go months in advance if you want. And I think it gives you a month at a time.
Yes, I did forget about that. Yeah, you can go. All right, first, let me finish this thought.
The reason I'm asking is people are asking for those links.
Okay,
And
yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, so there's that one. And then Heavens Above, that's a little easy to remember probably. Here we go. Okay, there they are. And then, right, yeah, these little buttons actually take you into the future.
Yep.
There we go. There's later in the month. Where's the highest point? 52 degrees on the 20th. Looks like a good one. 56 degrees on the 26th. Oh, 89 degrees, almost like straight overhead.
Yeah, minus fourth magnitude too. That's going to be a beauty.
Oh, okay, that's right. On Heavens Above, you get the brightness. And there's one thing about the brightness, the way that they'd invented the scale of brightness, the way it works is something like 6, a brightness of 6 is something that you can barely see. And then the number gets bigger, a smaller, I mean, a brightness of 1 is a really, really bright star. And they never planned for stuff brighter than that. So really, really bright stuff is negative. And so the more negative the brightness number is, the brighter it is. So even though it's 5:43 and still daylightish, it may not even be sunset by then. It must be a little after sunset. At that magnitude, almost -4, it's going to be visible. Now, this is a little, or they give you the direction that it starts in, the direction that it's going to be at its highest point, and then the direction that it sort of disappears. Okay, so yeah, have fun going out and looking for that. So let's end up with, again, I've just got a couple of pictures here.
Kevin, if I could just mention one
Yeah.
quick thing. One of the interesting things about Heavens Above, you can obviously find the space station, but it lists hundreds of satellites.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Many
Yes.
people don't realize that some of the famous satellites from way in the past, they're still orbiting. And a while back, I needed a telescope to see this, but I knew exactly where to look at a certain time, and I saw Telstar about 6 months ago, which was a satellite launched in 1962. A communication satellite for bouncing TV signals. Back when I was younger, a kid, they'd say live via satellite, and the satellite was Telstar. And believe it or not, it's still orbiting the Earth like a time capsule up there. And, it burned out pretty quickly because of atmospheric nuclear tests that they were doing, but it's still orbiting. It's an iconic satellite from the early space age. And if you know exactly where to look, if it goes by a bright star, you can aim your telescope, and exactly at the time it says on Heavens Above, the little point of light just zips right by.
Nice. Yeah. So yes, Heavens Above has a lot of stuff listed, not just, whereas the NASA site, Spot the Station, as the name suggests, is just for the space station.
Now, these pictures are from some friends of ours. A lot of families, one member of the family is an astronomer, but this is kind of an astronomical family. They're all interested in, and my buddy Don Goulet is a member of the Stars Club. I met him through the Stars Club, and we've been good friends for quite a few years. And we went down to the eclipse together in 2017. And his daughter, Caitlin, is a very accomplished amateur astronomer. She's only 12 years old, and she's the editor of the Starry Scoop, which is a newsletter that you can get. It's aimed at young people or beginners. It's a beginner astronomer could also use it because it's non-technical, and it's an email newsletter called the Starry Scoop, and it's starryscoop@gmail.com. Just send Caitlin an email with your email address, and you'll get on the list and start getting it every month. And I know there's an article about the Mars lander that's going to be happening soon. She talks about that. So it's a really good newsletter. It's good for students. It's good for anybody, non-technical, called the Starry Scoop. But anyways, last year, for a good portion of the year, excitement built throughout the year because the planets Jupiter and Saturn were moving through the sky. And as Kevin mentioned, the further away a planet is, the slower it seems to move, and the slower it's actually moving because it's further from the sun. And so Jupiter and Saturn were in the sky together, and Saturn was ahead of Jupiter, but Jupiter moves faster, and they're two bright points of light in the nighttime sky. Jupiter and Saturn, the two largest planets in our solar system. And just like a race car driver, if one car is going faster than the other, and you wait long enough, it'll lap the other car. And that's what Jupiter and Saturn do. Jupiter laps Saturn about once every 20 years because Jupiter goes around the sun a little bit faster than Saturn. So every 20 years it catches up with Saturn and then goes ahead of it. And then 20 years later, it catches up again. But this past December, when Jupiter caught up with Saturn, it did something that was pretty remarkable. It was something that hasn't been seen since the year 1226, believe it or not, since the 13th century. That's how far back you would have to go to see Jupiter and Saturn so close together in the sky. They were almost touching. Now, when you think about this, think about an airplane going overhead, and you put your finger up in the air, and you can kind of like touch the airplane with your finger. You can line it up, and it looks like your finger blocks the airplane. But the airplane is really a lot farther away than your finger. And that's what happened with the two planets. It looked like they were touching each other, but Saturn was billions of miles further away than Jupiter. So they weren't physically touching, they were just lined up. And that alignment happened on December 21st. And as I said, it was a big deal for stargazers because it was something that nobody alive had seen. Nobody had seen since 1226. It won't happen again till 2080. They were so close, they were 1/5 the width, the angular diameter of the full moon. So think of the full moon in the sky, and you can block it with your thumb easily. And 1/5 of the diameter of the full moon in angle, that's how close they came together, almost touching each other when you looked up at them. And that was on one night, December 21st. And they were saying it was going to be cloudy. In fact, the whole Northeast was supposed to be poor weather. So we were pretty bummed out about it. But Don and Caitlin and his other daughter, Christina Goulet, we all met out at Southwick Public Library along the driveway leading into the Southwick Library. Some other stargazers, Ed Fates, and some others from the Stars Club showed up with telescopes and cameras and tripods. And there was this big wall of ominous gray clouds coming in, and there was a few specks of blue sky, but this wall of clouds looked like it was going to obscure this historic event that we were anxious to see. And then like magic, after the sun went down and the sky was darkening, the clouds just disappeared. And the whole Southwest was just beautifully clear. And we were all struggling. Every one of us wanted to be the first one to spot the planets with our naked eye. And Caitlin Goulet was the first one to see Jupiter. And she said, oh, there it is. It was uncovered by a cloud. You could see it sparkling in the twilight. And we aimed our telescopes. And this was something that you never see normally. Jupiter and Saturn in the same eyepiece view through your telescope at high power, where you can see the rings of Saturn. You can see Jupiter, the ball of Jupiter with its 4 brightest moons, and they're right next to each other in the same eyepiece. It was just something that nobody had ever seen. So it was so beautiful. And this is one of the pictures that Caitlin took. This is a wide angle picture, just using a camera so that you could see the foreground with the trees. And obviously there's a few clouds along the horizon, but there's Jupiter, the brighter one, and Saturn is about at 2 o'clock from Jupiter. And that's about how they look to the naked eye. It was just an incredible thing to see those two worlds so close together. And is there another one?
Yeah, so there's more. So we're going to kind of we're going to kind of get in closer and closer, and we'll end up with the grand finale here. Okay. So it looks like, it looks like we're, zooming in with maybe longer and longer lenses.
This might have been a different night, I think, because I don't remember. We didn't get that close to the tree, so that's a different night.
Is it? Okay.
but that's a couple of nights before, probably before.
Okay, yeah, because they weren't really labeled that much. And then here's again looking zoomed in a little bit more. But then, all right, here is
That's while Jupiter was still chasing Saturn, trying to lap it.
Yeah, but here is why it was so exciting.
Yeah, look at this. This is through Don and Caitlin brought an 8-inch reflecting telescope, and remember that the inches means the diameter of the mirror, reflecting concave mirror. So that's a pretty good sized telescope. And they had a really fancy electronic camera that you put in place of the eyepiece, and it feeds the signal of the image into a laptop computer, and it creates a digital image that's much better than just using a regular camera that you use for snapshots. It's made for astronomy, and they were able to get this magnificent picture where it's overexposed so that you can see the moons of Jupiter, but Saturn is the top planet. You can see its oval shape because of the rings, and below that is the giant ball of Jupiter with the 4 little points of light, which are the 4 moons that Galileo discovered over 400 years ago. Their names are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. And it's like a little solar system. Those 4 moons circle Jupiter just like our planets orbit the sun. And Jupiter has dozens of more moons that you can't see because they're so small. But those 4 you can see in a small telescope. And so Don and Caitlin did a long enough exposure to bring out those moons, because that's a pretty cool aspect of the image. And in so doing, it kind of drowns out the clouds on Jupiter, which you can normally see, but it shows up the moons. And I think that's just a remarkable picture. And it was so exciting. I mean, we were elated because we were all convinced we weren't going to see it, but we just went there anyway, just in case. And boy, am I glad we did, from the Southwick Library. And the reason we went there is because there's a giant field between the library and Powder Mill School, and we needed a very low horizon because the planets were visible right after sunset, but they were going down quickly, and they set not long after the sun. So we needed a very low horizon with no obstructions in order to see the 2 planets. And that vantage point offered a beautiful horizon, very low, way off, off in the distance, with trees without lights or anything to interfere. And so what actually brought the observing to a close was ground fog that started forming after we had about 45 minutes to take pictures and hoot and holler and clap and enjoy this great event. Fog started forming, and it was a real surrealistic scene where you could still see the 2 planets, but the trees kind of disappeared into the fog, and it was really a remarkable experience and very, very exciting. And that's one of the cool things about astronomy, is that, on a pretty regular basis, there's some really neat, rare, beautiful, exciting, memorable event that happens like this. And, this won't happen again till 2080, but there's other events, different types of events that are happening on a regular basis that are equally rare and equally beautiful. So that's one of the really cool things about being an amateur astronomer, is these exciting events.
All right, so going to wrap up here with one last thing. And then somebody had a question, well, yeah, how do you know what direction you're looking in? And, that's something to, maybe you're out in a place that you go to often, and during the day, you can get to notice where the sun's coming up, where the sun's going down, and get to know the directions that way. Of course, maybe if a compass or anything like that could help as well. And then we'll end up with some images that I kind of almost related to that, looking again at the progress of the seasons. Just we'll wrap up with this. So this is looking actually out my office window, and right in this tree on the right, that peeking through there is the sun just coming up. This was taken close to the solstice in December. And so as the Earth moves, what happens is the point of sunrise is going to move along the horizon. So as I go through this, you'll see each day it'll jump, there'll be a different sky. And so you see it kind of stays in that tree for a while, and then it starts moving over to the left. And there it is coming out from behind the tree. And now, you know, like I haven't been able to take one of these pictures. I've been taking this every morning since December, but you know, it's cloudy. And so far this month, I have not been able to get one of these pictures. This one, so we're getting up. So in other words, I think this, oh yeah, I snuck in. This is actually moonrise one night. And moonrise over here on the opposite side, the sun and the moon on opposite sides of the sky. So the moon coming up at the opposite end of this. And so there we go. So this was the end of January. So in December, the sun was coming up over there, over on the right. And now it's sort of it looks, of course, really we've moved, not the sun, but now it looks like it's coming up over there. By the summer, it will be coming up over at the other side of this picture. And so maybe by May, we'll have a lot more of this filled in. So there we go. It's really happening. We're moving towards the end of the seasons, or the end of this season and into spring. Thank you very much. Do we have any last questions in the chat or anything, Mike?
No, chat is empty.
Okay, great. And thanks to Mike Kerr, the director of the Science Museum, or officially the principal of innovation and advancement. Thanks for helping out, watching the chat for us. Thanks.
My pleasure. We've had really good questions tonight.
Yeah. Thanks so much to everyone for coming by. And again, join us on the first, it'll also be the 5th of March. Join us then. We'll catch up with what's been going on and what's going to be happening at that point. Meanwhile, everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Good night, folks.
Good night, everyone.